So this is going to be a little bit different to the others in that this is largely going to be a review of where a technique from machine learning has got to in chemistry so far and where it might be going next. And that technique is reinforcement learning. So there's going to be a lot of reviewing of what other people have done here and relatively little of our interpretation of it, but a little bit of that at the end. I've been helped in putting this together by Jeremy and Niranjan, who we've already heard from. So the motivation, the background here is the machine learning work that's gone on in chemistry up until a few years ago was based very strongly on supervised and unsupervised learning. And there's a lot of problems these are great for. But something they can't really handle quite as well is the idea of sequential decision-making and planning problems. What you really need for that is an agent that can interact with its environment. You want to try to learn how to make good decisions to maximize some kind of long-term objective. And this is the idea behind reinforcement learning, which is no longer, no, okay, that's better. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the theory about how reinforcement learning works. So it essentially consists of four main components: a state space, which is a set of conditions of the environment and the agent that's interacting with it. This could be finite, it could be infinite, continuous, discrete. There's many possible permutations of this. The action space is the set of actions that the agent can take given the current state. This could, again, be continuous or discrete, depending on the problem that we're dealing with. You then have a reward. This is what's given to the agent based on the next state that you reach, having chosen an action. So we take the states, we choose an action, we go to the next state, and then we determine how much reward to give to that action. And this is defined by a reward function, which could be a function of several parameters. I'll come on to how you choose those functions later. And the final thing we need is a policy. And the policy is essentially a probability distribution that defines the probability of choosing each possible action given our current state. So given that we're in state F, how often should we choose action A1, A2, A3, all the way down to the last possible action? This is a little diagram showing how this works. So we have the environment, which has its current state and a current reward. The agent takes in the state and the distribution of previous rewards. It chooses an action, which is then looped back around to the environment to give us the next state and the next reward in the chain. There are several challenges associated with this. The agent obviously wants to maximize the total reward. And the way you typically do this is by trying to learn the best policy. So which policy maximizes the total reward given the distribution of states, how we choose the distribution of actions. And one challenge there is to work out when you need to take a smaller immediate reward in order to increase your reward later on. So for example, if you just took the largest reward action given your current state, you could fairly quickly end up at some kind of local optimum, when it might be better to take actions that give you lower rewards initially but put you in better states later to achieve more in the long term. Another challenge associated with this is the idea of exploration and exploitation. So should we take an action that we already know is good given our state, or should we try a new action we haven't investigated yet? Generally, you have to try to balance both of these. If you just explore, you end up picking poor actions too often. If you just exploit, you can miss the best combinations and end up stuck in the same positions again and again. There's a couple of other challenges involved with this as well. One is, so we assume that the action selection depends only on the current state, what's called a Markov decision process. You don't need to know the history, how you got there. This is quite a strong assumption, because we might not have a state space that actually captures all of the information you need in order to work out what action to take. That's called a partially observable Markov decision process, because in principle, everything should be a Markov decision process, but we might not have a state representation that lets us choose actions independent of everything outside of what we can observe. Fortunately, this doesn't actually impact things from a theoretical standpoint too much, because Markov decision processes generalize quite well. So we can kind of get away with this, essentially. The other challenge, really, is designing a good reward function. And this is really specific to the problem, exactly what we're trying to get the agent to do. because the reward's going to have to reward both. It's going to have to deal with the exploitation and exploration problem, making sure we don't do too much of one and not enough of the other. We also want to guide the agent towards actions we think are going to be positive for our eventual goal. So you might be wondering what use this actually is, because I've talked a lot about what it does, but not about why you might want to use it. And there are several examples in chemistry where this is quite useful. So the applications of reinforcement learning so far, the most widespread applications have been in drug discovery and design of small molecules. But it's also been quite widespread in designing biochemical sequences and larger molecules, in protein folding and searching conformer spaces, in reaction management and optimizing the yield of chemical reactions, and in chemical process control. There's also been some more niche uses. I won't talk about this quite as much, but it's turned up in synthesis planning. It's turned up in quantum chemical energy estimation problems. It's turned up in chromatography, a little bit in modeling batteries and modeling fuel cells, the life to how long we're expecting the device to last before it runs out of energy, and a little bit very recently in crystallization processes. So there's clearly a wide area of potential applications for this, even based just on what's already been done. So now I'm going to go into the theory a little bit. There are three main subdivisions you can look at in terms of splitting reinforcement learning up. So one way you can look at splitting them up is to consider whether your algorithm is policy learning or value learning. So policy learning, you learn the optimal policy directly. But in value learning, you learn a value function that maps each pair of state and action to values. So how much you think each action is worth in the state, and then you can infer the optimal policy from that. There's a subset of policy learning called actor-critic, and this actually does both. It models the policy function and the value function and plays them off against each other to improve both estimates. There are also a distinction between on-policy and off-policy methods. So we need to generate states and actions in order to train the agent. You could do that by using states and actions generated from the current policy, or you can do it by generating states and actions some other way, but using them to update your policy anyway. There are various advantages and disadvantages to both of these. On-policy methods tend to be more interpretable, but off-policy methods are often more sample efficient. And finally, you can look at model-based and model-free reinforcement learning. And the idea here is you can either learn the policy and action selection methods using a model for the environment dynamics, so modeling all the things that are going on in the environment that we don't observe via the state space, or you can achieve it without needing a model for the dynamics. And this might all sound a little bit complicated, and to be honest, that's because it is. Learning policy and value functions requires a lot of data. For example, in the most popular value learning algorithm, Q-learning, you literally want to learn every possible pair of states and actions. For every state you have, how much is every action I could choose in that state worth to me in the long term? So this is pretty much infeasible for large state spaces, continuous action spaces. However, this is a machine learning talk, so you might not be entirely surprised that the solution to this is possibly going to involve neural networks. So this is where deep reinforcement learning comes in. And the idea here is that you don't model the policy or value function. You don't learn the policy or value function directly. You approximate them via a deep neural network. And the big advantage of this is you don't have to interact with the environment so much. So we can just work with much bigger problems. We can take a much smaller sample of states and actions and build a good approximation to the policy or value function. This does introduce some uncertainty into the estimates, so you need to be careful about how you handle that because you don't actually know the true value of the state or action pair everywhere, only at the places you've observed it. And the other thing here is you need to make sure you choose an appropriate neural network architecture because there are a lot of them to choose from. I won't go into the details too much in this talk because that will make it twice as long. But this is just an additional thing to think about. So there are several different deep reinforcement learning algorithms. The value-based algorithms, there are two variants, deep Q learning and an extension called double Q learning. The idea with these is essentially, as with simple Q learning, you want to try to approximate every value state action pair. So we're going to try to learn a Q function, which tells us the value of every action given every possible state. But we're going to approximate that somehow. Sorry, that's gone forward a slide when it wasn't meant to. And we're going to use the neural network to help us with that. The policy-based algorithms are generally based on policy gradients. The most famous of these is an algorithm called reinforce, which goes back all the way to the 1990s. And then with the actor-critic algorithms, which are kind of generally seen as the way forward now, because they combine the best of both worlds, in a sense. There are many, many variants of these. I've written down the names of some of them here, but honestly, if you're really interested, I recommend looking into them, because they have various different properties, and there seems to be a new one invented every couple of weeks. So yeah, if you're interested, this is something worth trying to keep up with. In terms of which one to use, it really depends on the problem that you're attempting to solve. But it's also quite subjective. So there's a lot of theory behind which algorithm might be best for which problem, but very, very few actual firm answers. And if you ask 10 people who know about reinforcement learning, you might get 10 different answers about which one to use for your problem. So I'm now going to think about some of the application areas we talked about. And obviously, I introduced all these different application areas from earlier. But we obviously don't have time to cover all of them because there has been so much work on this. So I'm going to focus on the most active area, which is drug discovery. And there are several reasons why reinforcement learning might be good for drug discovery. It's been the focus of a lot of machine learning activity already via the other machine learning paradigms too. But you can view drug discovery as kind of a construction process in that we're trying to construct the molecule that we want to target the disease we're interested in. So the simplest way of doing this is to think about SMILE string construction. So given an empty string, select one character at a time until you have a complete SMILE string, and then you stop. As you can see in this example, this isn't actually a real drug. It's a real chemical, but you wouldn't actually use it to fight any diseases. I've just put it there to show how the process would work. And there's been a lot of different approaches taken to this. Several different kinds of neural network have been tried. Several different types of reinforcement learning algorithm have been tried. But you can sort of see why this problem might be difficult if we go back to our example problem, because there are a lot of steps along the way where this does not form a real SMILE string. So, for example, at step 2, we haven't put the entire chemical symbol for arsenic in yet because it's a two-letter symbol, and we can only learn one character at a time. And up until step 5, we haven't closed the opening bracket yet. So this is quite difficult to do in a way, because you have to mitigate for the fact that your intermediate states are not valid SMILE strings, and also that you need to know when you want to stop, given that you could potentially complete a string, but then you could add more things to it and get another valid string that might be more useful to you. So this is potentially quite difficult. And one thing that's been recommended to try to get around this is to use selfie strings instead, which are more robust. But the other way you could think about doing this is to view drug discovery and drug design as a graph problem. So we can use reinforcement learning with a convolutional neural network that works on graphs to construct molecular graphs from atoms and bonds, or from subgraphs made up of atoms and bonds that we choose at the beginning before we start the problem and then put them together to make the potential chemical we might like. So there are several possible actions you could take here. You could add more components to the graph, or you could just connect together existing subgraphs. So in this example here, for instance, we've started with a graph that consists of 2 disconnected components. And then in later actions, we've connected the 2 components together, but we've also added some extra bits as well. Another idea is to try to go even further and incorporate 3D information. So constructing molecules by placing and connecting atoms in 3D space. The approach that was taken by a couple of researchers to this involved using, again, convolutional neural networks, but also a feed-forward neural network, which is the simplest kind. Quite interesting, this most complex form of drug construction, in a way, actually ended up going back to the simplest type of neural network. There's yet another idea, which involves constructing new molecules from a starting set and going through reactants and reaction templates. And that's quite useful because that ensures that the proposed molecules can actually be synthesized.
We need to close soon.
Okay.
Steven.
Yeah, that's fine. Another idea you can go is by modifying known molecules, altering existing molecules, or putting fragments together and replacing fragments of molecules. Reward functions is very difficult. You want to promote good molecular properties. Sometimes you want to include intermediate rewards. Sometimes you want to get rid, not do. There's additional rewards you might want to include to try to improve the efficiency of your agent in finding good actions to take. You can even look at trying to update the reward function as you go, or letting the agent construct its own reward function based on some molecules that are like the sort of things you want to learn about. I'm just going to close with a couple of thoughts for the future. And this is obviously a growing area and a fast-developing area. Every paper I've cited so far, that was over a period of 4 years that they were published. But one challenge I think we've identified here is that very few of the molecules that have been found have actually been used in the real world yet. Now, there are lots of reasons why that might be, but one thing I think it's important to note is we don't just want to be talking to other people who are already interested in machine learning. We need to make sure we go out there and get the practical chemists on board with what we're doing. And finally, the way in which machine learning has been used in chemistry, reinforcement learning, has been very unbalanced. So there are some areas where there's been lots of focus, and there are some problems that have barely been touched on. And I think this is a good time to note that if you want to try reinforcement learning on some kind of sequential decision-making or planning problem, this is a really good time. Access to it now is easier than it's ever been. And a lot of the things in it are subjective. So there's not a lot wrong with trying different things till you find what works for your problem. And there are also more resources out there to help you than there have ever been before. So as daunting as it may seem, I've obviously gone through this quite quickly. There are things out there to help you, and it's probably a good idea to try it now if you're going to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steven.